Welcome back to Let's Talk, and today we will continue with this series dealing with Daddy, Where Are You? We are still looking at the testimony of a terrible life's journey, and we're going to continue right where we left off.
She said in her testimony, Pastor Collins, she said, still on my search for love. So she's telling us that she was searching for love, which caused her to move in with her boyfriend. She said, I was living just down the road from the house where I grew up, and none of my relatives wanted me. Wow. Nobody wanted her. So even if the man doesn't want her, she has nowhere to go. If the man chooses to treat her bad, nobody wants her. I had an uncle. I had gone over to the Bahamas. And I came back. While I was over there, he took sick and he needed someone to sign for him at the hospital so he can have surgery. And when I came back, I went to the hospital and I signed for him. And while we were going to the hospital, he said in these words, he said, Raj, when a man becomes a problem to people, he needs to be dead. I said, don't say that. He said, I said it already and I mean it. That's the way how people feel when they feel nobody wants me. I am a problem to everybody. She said, none of my relatives wanted to see me. And then she said, I got pregnant at 18. Well, if you remember well, if you missed the episode before, you would not have heard that she got pregnant at 15. So she's pregnant the second time at 18. And she said, just like the first time, I had my son alone. You know, sometimes when people look at young people like this, they have a way of taking advantage of them. She said his father dropped me off at the hospital and told me to call him when I'm ready to come out of the hospital. At that moment, I realized that no one wanted me, and I felt that no one loved me. Talk to me about that, Pastor Collins.
Yeah, that's a horrible feeling. And what just went through my mind, sometimes you would see, let's say a child has a son or daughter, they have a child out of wedlock, and the parents upset with the child for how they went about getting pregnant and so forth. But then the baby comes and they're all excited about the grandchild. So they somewhat forget what they were upset about before. But in this case, it didn't make a difference at all. And I find it so tough that none of the relatives wanted to see her. They just, in my view, they were just making it clear, you're not important to us. We don't care about you. We wish you were not around. That's what I get from this. That's what I get from this. And someone going through something like this must have had it tough, But God obviously had a plan for her life, because he kept her around, and he didn't allow her to just take the burden up and the weight of her circumstance in life and just give up. For some reason, God allowed her to continue and kept her going. I'm glad to hear what you said as well, that the end of this, it ends up well. Because listening to this and looking at this, it's a sad tale. That no one should actually go through this. We're allowed to make mistakes. We should be allowed to make mistakes. But we should still be loved and feel wanted and feel forgiven for when we mess up. Because we all mess up and we all need to have that forgiveness and some sort of grace even in life. Sad story indeed.
As I think of this also, you know, you would even think someone knowing what she went through. Let's think of the second boyfriend, knowing what she went through, even if he's not in love with her. My God, where's the pity? At least have some pity and feel for her and try to reach out to her and help her. But watch, the treatment is repeated. Mm-hmm. This boyfriend dropped her by the hospital, dropped her off. So if the hospital had say, sorry, we can't take you, she would have been there by herself. He dropped her off and say, watch, after you have the baby, if you need a ride home, call me.
Yeah.
Terrible. And bear in mind now, when she goes back home, she's going home with her son. But she got a 3-year-old daughter back home to go home to. And I could only imagine how life was. Knowing the end of this story, I can tell you, I am still proud of her. I am proud of her, how she weathered that storm and how she went through all of this and how she handled it. She said, I started working from a very early age. My then boyfriend used to rent videos and I would walk by renting them throughout the day. I also completed my schooling out of school. How she did it? Only God knows. I know back then we may not have had all the stuff that we have, that you could do stuff online. She had to do afternoon classes. But even though she had these 2 children, she continued to get her education because she knew it was important. It must have been somebody who said, I will hold the kids for you until you got back. But she completed her schooling out of school. She said, I knew I needed to do something with my life. Now, this is encouraging to those who may be out there having a tough time. What would you say to such persons who's having a tough time, Pastor Collins, taking a leaf out of her book?
What I would say is, I'm reminded of the statement in the scripture where David was having a tough time. He was probably stressed out, well stressed out. He couldn't live back home in his country. The king hated him, wanted him dead, so he was out running about with a band of men, and they were just fighting wars and those type of things. And things turned out that his whole family and everybody's family was taken, their city was burned, and the men he was hanging out with, the last few friends he had, they wanted to kill him. And that was it for him. Nobody cared for him. And the scripture that comes to mind is the fact when he said, but David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. And reading this makes me think of that. There will come a time when we wouldn't be able to look to the left or the right, back or front. We wouldn't be able to find somebody that would say something good to us to encourage us. We may not be able to find somebody like that. And when that time comes, we need to encourage ourselves in the Lord. The next statement that she makes here hammers it home. It says, one day I made a conscious decision to make a better life for myself and my children. So I would say that is her version of encouraging herself in the Lord and using the 2 children. And look how different her mindset was. She was seen as a burden all her life. She's not talking about her children being a burden to her. And of course, it would weigh on her because so young, underage, not having a good job, looking for love, having it so tough, and she could say, man, these children keep me back. If I didn't have these children, my life could have been so much better. If I didn't have these children, so and so and so, I could have stayed in school, I could have done this. No, she didn't blame the children. She encouraged herself by the children. I could only say it's God working in her life, because the same children, she as a child, she was seen as a weight and a discouragement by her mother and her grandmother. She now has children. Instead of seeing her children as a discouragement or a weight or a keep back, she uses them and them being around as a motivation for her to just make a better life. We need to find encouragement wherever we could find encouragement. And if we do have children and people that depend on us, we need to use that as a catalyst, as a turbocharger to just go forward and make. Sometimes it's much more easier to get worked up and get busy because we have to do it for somebody than for ourselves. And if that's the case, if that's what you have to tell yourself, that's what we got to do to get things done, we need to do it because people are depending on us. We need to get it done. And this is just, I would like to meet this person. It's just commendable to hear this, and you could see the change and the growth coming even from this testimony. And for anybody else who may think of, you know what, ain't nobody care for me. Number one, that's not true. You may not be able to find a human being on this planet that cares for you, but God cares for you. We're all here for a purpose. And every single one of us is a gift from God, right? And we need to use all that we could use to make life better for ourselves and those that depend on us. So don't give up. You may have to encourage yourself in order to go forward, but don't give up.
Yeah, I like what she did. She could have complained or blame others, like how it started, in the text that we read, where Adam blamed his wife, the wife blamed herself. She could have blamed her mother. She could have blamed her father. She could have blamed the boyfriends, but she didn't blame anybody. Speaking of David, she reminded me of David again when David's father sent him to take a little lunch for his brothers who were out in the battlefield. When David got there, there was a giant by the name of Goliath that had a standoff for 40 days, and King Saul did not know what to do, because when he looked at Goliath, he noticed, wow, what a huge fella. If he puts his hands on me, I am finished. So he looked at his size and he stood away from him, he and his army, for 40 days. And Goliath was just tempting them. Why don't you come out? Let me rip you to pieces. But David came, and David saw the same person. He saw the same giant. And what Saul thought was bad, David thought this is good. In other words, Saul thought that Goliath was too big for him to handle. And David decided the bigger he is, the better, because he's too big for me to miss. That's so right. David looked at the situation and did not allow that to keep him down. She reminds me of a David. She could have allowed that situation to keep her down and to put her back. But watch, she pressed on. She understood that sometimes to succeed, you have to fail. And not because you fail means that you are a failure. I am so excited and wanting to go on in this next episode with this What a Woman. And like you say, Pastor Collins, one of these days, if I live, she will come to St. Martin and we will meet her. I want to meet her myself also. If I tell you, I just saw her once and did not even know it was. I will meet her one day. I'm proud of her.